Hello, I'm meteorologist Rob Karlmark, and I've got an update in the month of May for El Nino. Now, at this point, it is out there. We are all talking about it. We've got a huge assortment of people that are discussing the current state of El Nino, what it may mean, all of the impacts, and all of the surrounding issues connected to what we now believe will be a quote-unquote super El Nino. In other words, just a really, really strong one. I don't know where super came from, but that's the terminology that we are using these days to describe something that is going to be very strong regarding this El Nino pattern and phenomenon that we'll be all dealing with in the summer, the fall, definitely the winter in California, and then moving beyond. But it's now reached the hype stage, so it's definitely coming. But my job here is to help you manage expectations. I've been down this road many, many times. I've been forecasting for more than 20 years all over the West, and this is something that when it starts to come together, you really have to dig into the weeds and then start to understand what may happen. And a lot of things are not going to happen. So let's just get into this. What is El Nino? Sea surface temperature anomaly. That is when the top of the ocean, the water temperatures start to be warmer than normal. The opposite is La Nina. We went through about 3 years of that where it's colder than normal, but in this zone in the middle of the Pacific, I mean, you can clearly see it. We all understand the color palette, right? When it's yellow, that's warmer than normal. When it starts to creep into the reds or the magenta colors, then you understand that, okay, we are really looking at something that's much warmer than normal. So in that spot, it's almost 1 degree warmer than normal. A ½ degree centigrade and above is considered El Nino territory as long as it's for 3 months in a row. And I don't think we're going to have any problems getting there. And you can see that there's other things happening. We've got warm water off the coast of Baja, almost the entire coast of California. So there's other things happening that start to play with El Nino conditions or may work against El Nino conditions. There's a lot of other factors that are happening at the same time. But I just want to focus on El Nino because that's really the big one, and it really does affect patterns for weather all across the planet, both somewhat beneficial and then also very detrimental. That's a thing that's going to be happening. So again, like I mentioned, La Nina, we've moved out of that. We are well above El Nino status, which is 0.5 Celsius and above. So this is roughly where we are. And when you add up all the computer models, this is where we're going. This is very strong. The last time we've seen something like this was back in 2015, 2016. And in some areas across the planet, it panned out exactly with what you thought. We saw drought in drought areas, very conducive to El Nino conditions. And then we also saw weird things happen. For example, in Southern California, it was the exact opposite. We thought it would be wetter than normal. It was drier than normal. And for Northern California, it was actually a little bit above average for rain. With that said, what fuels El Nino is actually underneath the surface. This is the top of the water here. So what I just showed you was sea surface temperature. These are buoys, and these are temperature gauges at depth. So they go down. It's the Triton system, but all you need to know is that underneath the surface, you have pockets of warmer water that are migrating in the opposite way. They're going across the Pacific from the Asia side to the South American side. And you can just see this. This is called a Kelvin wave. And what's going to reinforce as it works its way out towards South America. And once it makes it to the surface, those trade winds will blow that water back over. And so it's a cycle. All you need to know is that where we are right now, which is El Nino status, there's a bunch of warm water that's going to reinforce that and then take it to that next level. So remember all those squiggly lines I showed you? That's the reason why we're thinking that way, and the models are indicating that is because we know it's happening under the surface. So the weather pattern and the water to come in is really going to take it to this super El Nino status, and that's where it's roughly 2 degrees Celsius and above. We saw that 82, 83 for California, a lot of rain, a lot of damage. 97, 98, same situation. In fact, leading into that 97, which was 96, 97, which was not a super El Nino year, there was a lot of damage, a lot of really warm storms and flooding related just ahead of that. And then 2015, 2016, globally, a lot of what we thought would happen did happen, but like I mentioned, in California, it was actually the opposite. So there are, years where this just doesn't happen. Again, what we expect in the El Nino pattern, especially the strong one, is wetter than normal for Southern California and the South, and then warmer in the Pacific Northwest heading into Canada and Alaska. Now, I want to show you a very long-range computer model. Let's just face it, week to week, it's tough to forecast the weather, but if you just throw in all the numbers and where we're going with this, one long-range computer model, if you game it out to the winter, so I just picked right in the middle of our rainy season, look what may happen. wetter than normal conditions, not just for Southern California, but central, northern, all the way up till you get to that point where, like I just showed you, warmer and drier conditions for the Pacific Northwest, and then that continues into Canada and Alaska. So when you're actually putting numbers to this, not just graphics, but actual numbers into a computer model to game it out way into the future, that's what it's seeing. And again, the same thing. The reason why is that the southern jet gets very active and starts to replace the polar jet, which is what usually brings weather to our area. So not only do you get a lot of rain, you get a lot of warm storms and high snow levels. So again, this is something that we may see going into January of 2027. Now, the other part, and why everybody else is writing about this, is that this year, that projection that I showed you, again, the squiggly lines, 2.5 to 3.5 Celsius above normal. Now, the last time we've seen something like that, getting all the way to that upper end, is way back in 1877. Now, let's be honest here. Being very precise with water temperatures in that zone, it's a combination of using ship data, where they had buckets in the water and would use thermometers and get that. Also computer models, retroactively reconstructing everything, and then also using coral isotopes. So isotopes, analyzing the coral reefs that have been around that long and what happened back in the day. Since it's a growing organism, almost like tree rings, you can go backwards. This is the kind of stuff I am not an expert on, but the people that do this for a living, they say back in 1877, it was roughly within this range. So take it at face value. Let's go back to 1877. And this is where we run into this situation. A lot of extreme headlines, and this is where I want to manage expectations. So this is just one website. I'm not too familiar with them, but look at this title. I mean, come on, guys. The last time an El Nino was this bad, it killed 50 million people. Quote, "It was arguably the worst environmental disaster to ever befall humanity." If you're just a casual observer and you come across something like this, what ends up happening is that this, just on the headline alone, gets shared across everybody that you know, and then everyone's talking about it. I totally understand this, but we recently went through this in 2015 and 2016, and did this happen? No, it did not happen. You have to manage expectations. So let's just take 1877 as an example. We all know this. 1877 was a very different world, okay? One of the main things that they point to was it was a worldwide famine, a lot of it caused by a drought in India, in Brazil, and also in China. Famine is when you don't have enough food to feed the people. But it was a very different time. The drought, you could make a connection to drought conditions and El Nino. What typically happens during El Nino, a super one especially, is you get drought conditions in India, you get drought conditions in Brazil, and you get drought conditions in pockets of China. So I understand this part of it. However, again, this is a very different world. India at that time was run by the British Empire. And what was happening at that time was grain, which is a crop usually to feed people, was being converted into something that was being exported and sold. Also, they were converting to more crops that could make money, cotton among other things. You can't eat cotton. So things were happening in the background. That's a very important historical context about what was going on. Similar things happening in Brazil, also similar multi-year things happening drought-wise in China. And again, how people lived and moved water around with irrigation and big projects like dams and canals and all sorts of the things that we have now in our modern era. It's just a very different world. And I think people are forgetting all of these things because they're only looking at El Nino and then they're looking at famine in 1877. So that's, I think, the missing link. And that's what I want you to understand as well. Go back and look it up. These are interesting things. We also have worldwide aid that's possible. So if one area is experiencing a shortage of crops and food, the world will respond. We also have electricity. We didn't really have that in any sort of way back in 1877. So just the heat aspects. Let's say an area is very dry and very hot. We have air conditioning now. We have other things happening. So I do not think it's a one-to-one, apples-to-apples comparison. However, I do think that with a strong El Nino, areas of drought could certainly be impacted, and that would affect the local population, absolutely. But I think the one global takeaway that I think is almost set in stone is that with any El Nino, what you tend to have is this sort of escalator stair-step phenomenon. Overall, over time, just with global warming in general, the temperatures are going up. But what an El Nino, and certainly an El Nino, a super El Nino tends to do is just add a lot of heat to the atmosphere all at once, and then you tend to see a big rise in the global temperatures, and then it tends to stay there afterwards. So we're very, I would say the consensus here, scientifically speaking, I should say, is that we expect 2026, this current year, to be one of the hottest, if not the hottest on record, and certainly 2027 as well. So again, there's a lot to go through regarding a super El Nino and all the hype, but hopefully this gives you some context about what could and is very likely to happen in the next couple of years.